Today is the 28th of October, 2014, and this is episode 157. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, highly experimental, and we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. My name is Adam B. Levine. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Today we've got a bit of a roundtable. I'm here with Stephanie Murphy and Andreas Antonopoulos.
Hello.
Hi.
Along with guest host Pamela Morgan of Empowered Law. Hi, Pamela.
Hello.
The topic of today's discussion is BitNation, currently selling a crypto equity token called XBN as they raise money to create decentralized, blockchain-powered societies. We're joined by founder and CEO Suzanne Tempelhof. Thanks for being here, Suzanne.
And thank you, Adam. It's great to be on the show. And thanks so much for having me on.
So, Suzanne, before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty on this, can you explain to us from a high level what the intention is with BitNation and specifically what problem you're trying to solve and why this can't be done with just Bitcoin?
Let me first clarify that XBNX is not an altcoin. That's just a corporate equity, right? So I'm not trying to recreate another altcoin. We're not going to use it as a token inside the system, and it's nothing like that. The problem BitNation is trying to solve is essentially the voluntary choice of governance. Regardless of where you're born or what passport you hold or whatever, you should be able to have access to all this do-it-yourself governance tools. So that can be, for instance, getting married on the blockchain, or it can be deeding your house on the blockchain. It can be starting a company on the blockchain. And I mean, we'll also cover stuff like security and diplomacy and essentially everything that a normal government does. So some people, say that, it's better to not have governments at all. But we come from the belief that essentially people do want governance, and people also want ease of governance, meaning that there is one to go to provider who assembles all those different things. So let's say your house is on fire. You don't want to sort of sit around and think like what fire company you should call, right? You just want to have one number to call and people to solve it instantly. Yeah, so the assembly of all these different services is part of the service offering. So essentially, the people we're targeting the most are people who live in developing countries who often don't have access to these tools because the government is too dysfunctional or corrupt or slow or expensive. And even if the government did provide some of these tools, it just wouldn't be worth it. There is a huge demand for that sort of thing out there.
I'd like to get the kind of drama out in the open because there is some surrounding this project. Recently, the crowdfunding effort launched, and on that same day, three of what were self-described as the most senior participants besides you at the project, BitNation, basically all wrote letters saying that they could no longer be a part of it. I noticed that these senior people, one of them was an advisor, one of them was a chief communications officer, and one of them was a communications partner. So it's interesting that those are kind of the senior, that's what's senior there. But I just wonder, can you articulate and explain, at least from your perspective, what exactly happened here, what the issue was and why it happened at such a crucial time?
The article that came out in Cointelegraph was somewhat misleading because it said the senior core dev team resigned. I mean, none of them were actually dev. None of them had worked for the company for longer than a month. Maybe one had worked for maybe a little bit more than a month, but I don't think so. So they were all very new to the company and not particularly key. So that's misleading to start with. What happened? I mean, I know they are going around doing slander in public, and I don't want to get into that sort of fight.
Well,
I'm
but
not
they had real complaints.
Anyone.
They had a real complaint specifically, and I'm happy to articulate it if you don't want to. It was that the project wasn't necessarily going to have a legal framework, and you weren't necessarily going to incorporate. And this is specifically interesting to me because, Suzanne, you remember the first time you and I talked, you were asking if I was interested in consulting on the project. And one of the first things I asked you was if you were going to go through the kind of legal system in attempting to do what you were trying to do. And you told me very, very upfront, no, you weren't, that you were planning on avoiding that because it had a lot of problems associated with it. And so that was something that actually made it slightly more interesting for me to work with you creatively, because Otherwise, it was clear to me that you were going to be running into regulatory barriers left and right, and that this would be a thing that would be much less about the token and about what it is that you're doing with, the BitNation project, and much more about how your BitNation project is complying with the existing systems. So, am I incorrect in identifying that was the point of stress here?
Yeah, that was basically the major complaint. Yeah, and which I agree with you. I find that slightly strange because I have said that the entire time, as you just pointed out, and and it's also like one of the services we're selling. Basically, we're saying that you can do all the things the government do, but on a voluntary basis without the government. One of the things we are selling is indeed corporate incorporation on the blockchain. And these people knew about that from the start. So I just think it's very weird, that they came out the day of the crowd sale. But if you don't want to work in a company that is selling governance 2.0 services, I don't see why you would expect us to be incorporated, because that would be against all our principles, right?
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, Suzanne. You are presenting BitNations as an alternative to government, and you propose that you will be offering governance services for individuals to participate in voluntarily. So on the one hand, I can understand your argument that you will not want to incorporate with the state in order to provide these services. However, at the same time, your crowd sale is going on with a single key address, not a multi-sig address, which means that there is no separation of duties in the control of the funds internally within your company. And at the same time, there's no independent counsel, and there's no independent legal support, and there's no independent financial officer in the company. So if you are providing governance services to others, can you explain why your crowd sale is being conducted without any governance internally, which is also a complaint? You're saying you don't incorporate because you want to do governance independently of the state, but you're not doing governance in your own crowd sale.
Well, essentially, we're a 3-month-old startup. It takes time to get all of those things together. When it comes to the multi-sig address, I tried to clarify that yesterday on Crypto World Networking. Essentially, it's a 2-stage process, and we're done the first step of the process. The second step is being set up right now, but it takes time to set up everything. So it will very soon be transferred to a multiple SIG address. I'm happy to sort of send you the whole outline for the setup if you wish.
You said the crowd sale is going on for 3 months, but at the same time, you're saying that you didn't have enough time to set up a multi-sig address. Something you said yesterday on the World Crypto Network was that there wasn't enough time to set up a multi-sig address. Now, this is the most basic of corporate governance structures that exist in blockchain technologies today. So how is it that a company that is a specialist in blockchain-based governance can't set up the most basic form of governance before the crowd sale? And how come a crowd sale that is going to last 3 months is so urgent that you can't set up the necessary governance first?
Well, essentially, we're doing this on a shoestring budget. There's a lot of cost associated with it. To keep on doing the development, that's why we set up the crowd sale around different benchmarks, right? And so even if the crowd sale goes on for 3 months, it means we can still release money when we meet those development benchmarks. We should have started with the whole cold wallet storage setup and everything a little bit earlier. We are absolutely right. And we have done everything we could in that amount of time. So essentially, if it wasn't for all the drama of essentially Vend pulling out the sales model in the last minute, and we had to rebuild all of that, and which took about 48 hours to get that back up, that wouldn't have been a problem. So it was a lot of unexpected circumstances, and that's really regrettable, but those things happen. It's a startup, and that's startup life. It's not going to be perfect at the outset. It will take time to make it good.
Well, right now, only one person has control of the crowd sale funds through a single key. Can you tell us who that person is?
Well, right now, that's me. I have a separate cold storage wallet, but we also have a watch-only wallet, and we're setting up the second steps right now. So that will change very soon.
Can you describe what you're doing in terms of the second steps? Yesterday, you talked about some cold storage and offline signing devices.
Yeah, so essentially we are setting up laptops that are entirely clean, that have never been connected to internet. So the laptops will be sent to the other key holders and then set it up from there. So there will be 3 persons holding the keys, and 2 persons are needed for every expense. That's about it, yeah. I can forward you the entire proposal if you like, Andreas.
Yesterday, you said that this was being coordinated by Michael Perklin, who set up the corresponding cold storage scheme for Ethereum. And you also said that these devices are being shipped now, and there are some delays due to international shipping. Michael Perklin released a statement this morning saying that, and I quote, "As a security company, Bitcoin Sultans have non-disclosure agreements with all our clients that prevent us from discussing the work we do for them without their written permission. While Bitcoin Sultans was in contact with BitNation staff regarding retaining our services, our proposals were not accepted by way of signed contract. As a result, Bitcoin Sultans has not created or shipped any product to BitNation. We wish them luck and success with a very ambitious project." Now, this directly contradicts the statements you made yesterday that you had used the advice of Bitcoin Sultans, and specifically Michael Perklin, who designed the Ethereum solution, and that these devices were already being shipped to the key holders and key signers. Can you address these statements?
Absolutely. So let me clarify one thing at a time. In terms of using Michael Perklin's services, we have been working for several weeks on setting up everything. So yeah, the contract was not signed because we made several amendments to it, etc. That was just signing the actual contract was just a technicality, But in terms of the computers being shipped, I think there was a miscommunication yesterday. What I was trying to say, I was trying to outline the next steps and to manage expectations that it will take some time before the multiple SIG wallets appear, because we need to ship the computers. We need, it's a lot of work to install everything, etc. So I was saying that in an attempt to manage expectations, I wasn't referring to the shipping time, saying that was what was causing delays. If that was a misunderstanding, I take that on me. I expressed myself badly. That may be the case, and I tried to clear that up with Michael Perklin. And yeah, I've been trying to be as accurate as I possibly can regarding this.
Well, Michael Perklin felt the need to issue a statement specifically disavowing participation in this part of the project after hearing his name mentioned several times yesterday on this recording, which is in public. People can see it on YouTube and draw their own conclusions. So to summarize, we've got a crowd sale that's going to take 3 months, but had to be done so urgently that no governance system could be put in place, which puts the funds directly in control of one and only one person, yourself. Shouldn't this be a concern for people? I frankly find this very disturbing, that a company that is attempting to set up private governance has no internal process for governance. And this is directly supporting the complaints made by the people who departed, who said that exactly this structure and lack of internal structure and governance was the reason they did not trust the company.
Well, again, it's a startup. It takes time to build up a team of, trusted people, which is very clear with the people who departed, that they were not trustable, That just takes time. I think every single startup goes through that same phase, and you just sort of water out people who are more interested in their own publicity or whatever than in the overall goal of the company. So that's just going to take time, and that's something we have to live with. In terms of the multiple SIG wallet, I understand that's a concern, and that's why we're addressing the concern, and we're doing everything we can to get everything set up as quickly as possible.
Who in the company is responsible for governance at the moment, either operationally or technically? Do you have any governance technology or governance operations experts within the company at the moment?
So can you please clarify what you mean by governance?
I mean, the process of setting up internal controls within a company and also the technical tools to set up things like multi-signature, smart contracts, and the capabilities that you talk about offering as BitNations, which you weren't able to implement for the first round of the crowd sale. Do you have any experts, technical experts, or do you have any operational experts within the company today who know how to do governance?
It depends what you mean by governance. If you talk specifically about the smart contracts and that sort of things and internal
just accountability, right, Andreas? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'll be very, very clear. There are a number of technologies being mentioned in the BitNations white paper, including smart contracts, smart property, using the blockchain as a registry and permanent record, as well as frequently multi-signature technology. Of all of those technologies, the most practicable and most accessible to everyone today that's been existing for more than a year is multi-signature. We have here as our guest Pamela Morgan, who sets up multi-signature governance programs for companies. This is something that already exists and people are implementing. Do you have anyone who can do multi-sig at your governance company?
Well, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of advisors who do that, and you have done that multiple times. I mean,
because... I'm sorry, did you just say that you have set up multi-signature addresses a number of times?
No, I have never set up any multi-signature address before. But we have plenty of advisors who have done just that. So until a couple of hours ago, Michael Franklin was the one handling all of that. Now the status is unclear because of the miscommunication yesterday. I don't know if he is still on team or not. But I hope he still is and that we can continue our work with that. Otherwise, I will have to work with others. And so the other key holder is someone who's very well respected in the community. I don't want to say his name because I don't want to make him a target, but he will have to take over the role of setting everything up and moving it forward instead. And he was anyway supposed to be one of the key holders, and he already have cold storage set up and multi-sig set up with publicly recognized addresses. So it's not a problem. I mean, it's another road bump, but it's something we're handling.
So Suzanne, why not wait and do the crowd sale later when you handle these things?
Well, mainly because we told everybody we were doing it as the state, right? That we have been communicated to all the medias and everything. And people are waiting for it and expecting it.
But wouldn't it be better to delay so that you could hold the funds safely and securely than to have a single signer wallet where people are depositing funds that are accessible only by you?
Well, I mean, the funds are secure. They are on a hardware that never been connected to internet in Armory wallets. So this is not concerning security in that sort of sense, in the sense of hacking, right? So yeah, it's concerning distribution. I mean, again, this is a matter of a couple of days to be fully finalized.
A multi-signature wallet can typically, or an address can typically be set up within an hour. All you need are the public keys, and each person can set them up individually using their own public keys so that they don't have to reveal their private keys. So I'm a little concerned or confused as to why it's taking BitNation so long to do that when anyone else can do it in a matter of really an hour.
Well, because essentially it was a really ambitious plan to buy hardware, clean hardware, new laptops, and ship them around, etc., which would take more time. So we did it in 2 steps. But if you're suggesting that we can have a temporary multi-sig that can be set up within hours, I don't know in terms of security how that would work, or if that would be more or less secure. I would need to speak with the other key holder about that, but I would be happy to explore that option with you.
The multi-sig issue, like a lot of this other stuff, really has more to do with the fact that this project is aspirational. And, you've identified all of these technologies that can solve all of these problems. And it sounds like the reason why you're fundraising is because you want the funds to be able to put together the team, to pay them, to then make all of these connections and build all of the essentially connecting platforms to make them more useful than they are by themselves. Am I on the right track?
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, it's not only technology.
I'm very curious, given the opportunity to do this again, what would you do differently?
In terms of, well, now I know sort of more how much time all the different steps take, and I would have prioritized steps that take longer time, which I thought wouldn't take as much time. For instance, the whole cold wallet thing, all the writing and stuff. So yeah, I would have put that more in priority in the beginning and delayed other tasks until later. That's a learning experience, right? In terms of hiring people, it's quite challenging because with this type of aspirational project that is very open and community focused, you want to let everybody in essentially. So due diligence on people is somewhat counterintuitive, but I should definitely have done much more due diligence on some people before letting them into more of, the sort of management level. You just never know who you hire really. So that's also something you learn along the road.
That was actually one of the other complaints that the developers who left BitNation had. It was that the system was really not secure. There were volunteers being brought on that weren't paid, but they were just kind of, allowed to go into the project. And they were really concerned that someone might have malicious intent and potentially have access to a lot of people's personal data once people started to, trust BitNation or whatever. What mechanisms do you have now in place to vet people? Because governments historically attract people who are corrupt, power corrupts. And what are you doing to address that?
Well, one thing I learned, obviously, is to talk to former employees and former business partners of people. A lot of them who came to me afterwards, and said, we're so sorry, the same thing happened to us. First of all, there weren't devs, I just want to clarify that once again. But anyways, there were people who been, in the community for a long time. So I thought that because normally people don't want to come across as assholes in the community. And so I thought that was a way to preserve it, right? In terms of security, we have, through Cloudflare, we have the DDoS and all of that set up. We have done basically most of the security measures I can think of for what is a counterparty crowd sale. Obviously, when the actual platform takes off, then we'll have to revisit the security strategy and make it much more rigid. Yes, it's true that everybody worked on a voluntary basis. That is the nature of the project. What I told everybody when they joined was that if CrowdSale is successful, they will get a back pay of salary, if that's the agreement. And if it's not successful, nobody gets paid. That's how you have to operate at this sort of swarm type organization. In terms of governance, to get back to your question, Andreas, essentially my government strategy, if you want, is based on Holacracy and the book from Rick Falkwinger, Swarmwise. And he's also personally advising me very often on how to manage different things. There he outlines essentially how you build a grassroots organization based on volunteers. So that was a conscious strategy from at the outset.
I was actually watching BitNation, the website, to see when the white paper would be released, because we actually had plans to interview you last week, Suzanne, and that didn't work out. But I was watching the website to find the white paper because the crowd sale was set to start at that point the next day, and the white paper still was not available. The white paper wasn't up until very recently before the crowd sale started. The development plan and the business plan also were not released until very shortly before the crowd sale started. Why not just push the crowd sale back? It's pretty clear. It seems like maybe you weren't ready, could have used some extra time. It's okay to delay it.
The basic reason we're not delaying it is because of financial concerns, As you said before, everybody's volunteers, everybody's working without salary. And there are a lot of associated. I probably spent $50K USD from my own pocket. We just can't, work forever without financial resources. And also because we had set that date, I know people in the Bitcoin community is quite connected and travels quite quickly. But outside of the Bitcoin community, that's not really the case. And so the information on why the crowd sale is postponed, will be a lot harder outside of the community to propagate.
It seems like, though, that the trust of people in the Bitcoin community, especially for a project like this, where you really are asking for a lot of trust, you're asking people to trust you with their personal data, with managing things about their lives. That's what government is, or governance is. In the long term, it was pretty tight-lipped before the crowd sale started. People didn't really have much time to understand what was actually going on. There was no code, there was no white paper. And so just from my perspective, I look at something like that and say, what's going on with this?
Well, I have a slightly different perspective about it, probably because of my own background. I mean, I've been speaking about this for about 10 years. I did a TED Talk about it 2 years ago. I've been working on a book on this exact subject for nearly 2 years. I know in the Bitcoin community it's not that widely spread, but in the sort of governance communities, it is, what can I say, like expected idea. From my point of view, actually the project happened rather late. You know, I would have probably wanted to kick it off a year before. But at that time, I didn't understand how much of these problems the blockchain technology could solve. So that's why I didn't kick it off before, actually. I mean, I guess it's just two different perceptions. In terms of like a corporate setup, the company is only 3 months old. That was quite big, you know, between starting to set up the company to doing all the things. But on the other hand, a lot of people have seen a lot of crowd sales, and people know quite well how crowd sales goes, right? My sort of personal assessment was that actually 3 months was quite right with time, because the process is so outlined and formalized by now. So everybody pretty much know, you know, you use Counterparty, publish a white paper, you set up a website, you know, communicate your idea. I mean, it didn't seem to me as 3 months was particularly outrageous.
We've seen a lot of crowd sales that haven't necessarily produced results. Like, I think we've had some bad experiences with crowd sales as a community in the past. But I actually want to ask you a different question, if you're willing, and that is, like, how do you see physical world governments interfacing with BitNation? If someone tries to secure land rights in a developing country, South America or Africa, for instance, what will the local government have to say about it? Won't they just take the land and not care about what the blockchain says? Like, how does this interface with the real world?
I used to work with governance issues for nearly 7 years as a contractor. So I'm quite well familiar with those exact problems in the developing world. The truth is, I mean, this is stuff that every government is trying to figure out, how to do all of these things, because what happens is that when you can't secure certain things like land, which means people can't take credit on their land, they can't invest in the land, and it creates a lot of conflicts. Or if they can't incorporate, that means they can't expand, they don't have economic mobility, and all of those things leads to great insecurity. Arguably, one could say that what kicked off the Arab Spring, for instance, was the perceived lack of economic mobility due to administration, due to other things, and corruption, etc., inside the system. Yeah, so I actually been approached by several people, both from the US government and others, who want to look into the system and use it themselves. And so what I tell them
is... But to use it themselves, like, how are they going to be using it? Governments have one tool, and that's force. Why wouldn't they just continue to use the hammer and make everything look like a nail, even if BitNation is offering a voluntary solution?
I mean, that's what I'm sort of telling them. I'm like, well, you know, everything we'll do is open code, so you can fork it and try to provide people the same thing in a centralized, top-down sort of fashion. I think we'll be very successful as an approach. But my point is that, you know, governments are afraid of unrest. And if someone, regardless if it's them or not them, providing an alternative that will give people more economic mobility and be able to settle local disputes that the government is unable to settle, I think most governments should realize the benefits of that, especially since they don't even have to pay for it or implement it themselves.
Okay, yeah, so local disputes is one thing if everybody agrees to be bound by the system, which is maybe another problem. Are you expecting someone to have a BitNation ID and have a government recognize that as like a foreign passport or something like that? It's hard for me to picture them, even if it's such a great system, jumping on board with it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the ID system, yes. No, I wouldn't call it, I mean, we will call it a passport, but I mean, it's not a passport in the sense of a travel document, right? So it's a passport between blockchains, essentially. So the point with ID is that you have both the verification system and the entire ID to like all other contracts that you do, like let's say land registry or marriage, or if you're going to start a DAO or DO, whichever acronym you prefer to use. So, it becomes something that you can move around with and use for a lot of purposes.
Isn't there some potential for abuse and compromise in that system, though? Because if you have a digital ID that's tied to a lot of aspects of your life, such as your marriage, your land ownership, your contracts with other people, business dealings, perhaps, and someone somehow compromises it, that could be a pretty significant problem.
Yeah, I mean, cyber attacks is definitely something that's being overwhelmingly discussed, in terms of blockchain-based IDs. And it's something that the community, I think, haven't found a perfect solution for. And I doubt there will ever be a perfect solution for that. I mean, there will only be preventive actions, right? So one of the preventive actions can be to create a barrier of entry, essentially making it more expensive to create an identity, which will somehow prevent it a little bit. But again, it's not a perfect solution. And I don't know what the perfect solution is.
It's going to have to be figured out. I mean, there's going to have to be some system in place. Like if you're talking about paying XBN to create an ID or something like that, but you're targeting it at people in developing countries, where are they going to get that from? Like, how are they going to pay into a system at a level that's going to discourage spammers, but let the people who maybe, quote, need it most?
To register an ID is absolutely not a requirement to use the platform. If people want to be anonymous, they are very welcome to be anonymous. By the way, that's a problem with the whole blockchain structure, that there is not enough anonymity. I definitely encourage people to stay anonymous, and XBNX is not to be used as a token on the platform. So you can buy XBNX, and that doesn't require an ID by any means. So that is absolutely not a concern. The ID system will take some time to put in place and be made properly, but that is not a roadblock to use the rest of the platform by any means. So I just wanted to clarify those things.
And actually, Stephanie,
Suzanne?
what I wanted to ask you was to further clarify your question a bit more and put a time frame on it. Because again, like we're talking with Suzanne when they haven't fundraised, when there's not actually a project. So it's really hard to talk about these specifics unless you're saying, okay, well, in 10 years, what's that going to look like? Because I mean, obviously, African rollouts and stuff like that might take a while.
Sure, I can clarify that. Before I would ever consider endorsing a project like this or funding a project like this, I would want to know a lot more detail about what the security features are going to be, what the accountability features are going to be, what the actual plan is, what the code is actually going to do, and how it's going to work. And I still have a lot of questions, including about the ID system, but really they extend throughout the whole thing.
We do have the white paper and the dev plan, and that is on Google Docs and open for everybody to comment on. It's not perfect, but it's a window of opportunity. We have our Skype chats with a lot of community members in them where everything can be discussed freely, etc., and just like counterparty or Ethereum, etc. So, I mean, we do have a lot of insight and openness.
Is the biz plan available, Suzanne? Because I don't see it.
No, not yet, because of all this craziness, particularly with Vend pulling out the sales model in the last moment. We haven't had time to finalize it. It wouldn't take very long to finalize, but it's just been so overwhelming with the sales model rebuild and the counter wallet issues and all of that. So,
but the term sheet is still available as well, right?
Yes, that's available.
In the term sheet, you refer to board meetings. And I was hoping that you might be able to tell us who's on the board of BitNation.
I want to take the time to find really good people and do really thorough due diligence on them, because that have been one of the problems in the past, that I did not do enough due diligence on people who proved to be not very good. That's something that's going to be built over time, but I want to take the time to build it properly and not rush through with setting up a board of people who are not really committed to the vision or not really committed to the project and so forth, so I don't run into the same problems again as I had with some others.
This episode is brought to you by CryptoKid.com, the easiest, fastest way to spend Bitcoins right from your browser. Today's magic word is multi. That's multi, M-U-L-T-I. You've got until the 1st of November to visit letstalkbitcoin.com or the Let's Talk Bitcoin iPhone app and enter it for your share of the listener awards. Back to the show.
So I have another question for you, if you don't mind. I noticed, I can't remember if it was the white paper or one of the other papers, that you said that BitNation has been incorporated on the blockchain. And I'm hoping that you can explain what that means as far as BitNation goes, because in a legal sense, there is no such thing as incorporation on the blockchain. So I'm hoping you could explain kind of what that means.
Well, essentially what we mean with incorporation, which is also one of the services we offer, is that so through the counterparty system, create a token, and each of those tokens then becomes a part of the equity, right? Which means that it's paying dividends. So the way we have structured it is that we project that we're going to start earning a profit after about 2 years and then be able to pay about 10% dividends, because we need to keep a lot of money inside of the project to continue with the development and research and all of that. 10% is about the sort of standard on the stock market. So I think that's pretty fair. The business model consists of a couple of separate strands for making profit. I think the most profitable part of BitNation will be to charge a small fee on the dApp library. So essentially, third-party developers can upload dApps for their own DIY governance applications, and they can choose to give it away or they can choose to sell it. We'll charge a very small fee on that. If you look at the Apple App Store, they charge 50%, and we'll try to not charge more than 2 or 3% to keep it very accessible for everybody involved. So that is one strand, which is sort of an automatic minimal charge. Then we can charge for various smart contracts, which would have a separate benefit of preventing civil attacks as well if there is a entry cost to using the smart contracts. But I also find that, the ethical thing is a little bit hard to balance, because we also want to make it accessible for a large number of people who do not have a lot of money, right? I'm not entirely sure how much or what smart contracts we're going to charge for yet, but will probably be a bit of charge for some of those applications. Another strand is what I like to call spin-off products. So one of those things are actual printed physical ID, like, for instance, in countries like Estonia or Afghanistan. This is actually the case already in Estonia. People don't trust government IDs because, again, corruption, inefficiency, etc., and they trust corporate IDs. Again, it's nothing that can be used as a travel document to cross borders, but it can be used as an ID for everything in country, including when dealing with the government. For instance, in the case of Estonia, that's already the case. There's a private company providing printed IDs, which is the commonly accepted ID form. That is another product that we are offering as well. There are about 16 different strands. I'm happy to share the financial projections with you if you like it, and you can have a look at it and poke around.
Are you planning to make those public?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how soon?
Well, I mean, I actually sent out a couple of drafts already, which I put on our Skype channel where there are more than 100 people. And I also put it out on Facebook. Yeah. Earlier draft have already been circulating and been commented on by the community. But I will put out the final draft. Hopefully, well, I mean, right now what takes precedent before everything is to sort out the counter-wallet issues. So as soon as that is sorted out, I don't know how many hours that's going to take. But yeah, as soon as that is done, my number one priority will be to get the business plan out with all the financials.
I love the idea of having, contracts and smart contracts. And I spend a lot of time exploring how we can make smart contracts work in the real world. And so that's why I'm really, really interested in BitNation, and all of the claims are just fantastical. So I'm wondering, I'm looking at the crowd sale terms, and I see a clause here that says XBNX don't translate into having any type of legal or other responsibility for the DO or any of its activities. And that clause sounds great, but in reality, it seems to me that if these are holders of equity, that they would have legal and possibly other responsibilities, particularly if they're in the US. Equity holders in companies that aren't officially incorporated, buying through the state, do not enjoy limited liability protection. And what that means is that if someone were to purchase XBNX, who was in the US, they would essentially become a general partner and put all of their personal assets at risk. And so I'm wondering how this clause protects people, or if you think that it does, or how this legal responsibility plays out for holders of XBNX and BitNation.
Well, so from my understanding, from the legal advice I've had from people who used to work both FinCEN and the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, from what I understand, if people are not officers in the company and there are no voting rights, I mean, the officer thing being the most important, right? There is actually no legal liability at all. I mean,
that's for companies that actually are corporations. What you've created is not a legal entity that's recognized by the state. So that would be true if you had incorporated, for example, in California or in Delaware. That would absolutely be true. But I believe that you said earlier that you hadn't done that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you haven't availed yourself of the state protection, I don't think that those rules apply.
Well, in terms of state protection, I mean, people tend to protection. What an incorporation does essentially is that you can claim bankruptcy. I mean, if you do a criminal thing, you still go to jail. Nothing will protect you. It doesn't matter if you have a company incorporated or not.
I don't think we're talking about jail, though.
People go to jail, So I think people have a misconception of what it means to be incorporated in a government jurisdiction. It really doesn't do that much difference.
I don't think any of us are talking about criminal liability, right? I think what we're talking about is civil liability and money, and whether or not, so that people can make an educated decision about whether or not they're going to invest in XBNX. I think it's important that they recognize that they won't be getting those same protections that they would be if they were investing in a company that had incorporated in some jurisdiction in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that can also be a point of liability, if you're incorporated somewhere in the world, because that gives you a central point of attack. I mean, that's been the case with Bitcoin. Bitcoin emerged as a technology that didn't ask for permissions. And then when it became widely used by people, governments had to get their head around it and create a legal framework around it. And I think crypto equity is facing much of the same thing. I mean, crypto equity as a concept, even though it's been around in the cryptosphere for a long time as a concept, is now still very far from being a part of the general public's understanding, right?
Absolutely. But I think when you ask people to give you money, particularly people who aren't related to you, who aren't friends and family, you're asking them to trust you with those funds. And I think that without some sort of justification for why people should trust you, many people look to the state. And those are the reasons why the state has rules about, okay, you have to have certain corporate governance in place. You have to have a board of directors. you have to have someone to be held responsible, right? And so, as you said earlier, there are companies who we want their board of directors to be held responsible because they're taking individuals' money and they're using it to their own ends. And so my question, to go back to, the board of directors, it seems that you don't have a board of directors. It seems that you aren't willing or able to discuss who the directors or the management team within BitNation is, and we don't have a business plan from you. So I'm wondering how we can continue with this crowd sale, and what would you say to people when they were asking, okay, who's behind this? Should we be trusting just you, Suzanne? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, the community of developing BitNation, through our internal chats, through all the chat groups. If you look at the previous documents that have been published, from everything from initial dev proposals, etc., it's been commented on by very high-level people in the community.
And have you incorporated those comments?
Since it's still in terms of a beta version, the code is still, we haven't released any code yet, so it's too early. But yes, of course, I would incorporate all of those comments, and that's a given. But one thing at a time, first we're starting with the crowd sale, and as the website indicates, there are development benchmarks, which includes getting the code ready. So when we come to that stage after the initial road bumps with counterparty, etc., are dealt with, then we will move forward to that. And yes, of course, everything will be incorporated and public. I mean, it already is very public. First of all, that in terms of the business plan and the financials, as I said, they will be released very quickly. Everybody's working as hard as they can. It's just a lot to deal with right now, especially technical problems that we have to put in priority before everything else. Multisig, again, that's also in the working, and that will also be done very quickly. All these problems are being addressed, When it comes to the board, I don't want, as I said previously, I do not want to rush that, because I want people who have worked for the company for a while, who have proven themselves to be trustable over time, who have a good track record, etc., etc. So I just don't want to rush the creation of any board.
I'm a lawyer, so I'm interested in the legal aspect. So forgive me for continuing to ask this, but I see in paragraph 8, it says that this agreement is covered by British common law, and any dispute that arise will be resolved through BitNation's dispute resolution platform. And my question to you is that I don't see the BitNation's dispute resolution platform in existence. I don't really see in the white paper any clear direction on when or how that's actually going to be created. So I'm wondering if you have a time frame on when that's going to be created and what you would expect people to do in the meantime.
Yeah, so essentially the most functioning code out there right now is Bitrated, which is a platform that exists. I think the address is bitrated.org or bitrated.com, if I'm not mistaken. It's a code, you can see it on our GitHub. We have the code from Bitrated there. We're going to use that as the basic code. So essentially, the way they have structured it is that anyone can register as an arbitrator, which we think are great. But we also want to include another functions that everybody can upload their own code of law, right? Which will not be in a smart contract basis, because before the law is codified, that will take a long time, right? But it will be a code of law that you can still timestamp on the blockchain. So it will serve some protection and some reference. I can't answer right now the exact time frame when that will be up, but essentially the code is there, and it's not the extra features we want to add to it. It's not hugely challenging. So definitely before the end of the crowd sale.
I guess my last question is a meta question. Suzanne, I've heard you say in other interviews that you consider yourself a voluntarist or a voluntarist, which is basically another word for anarchist. And I'm not using that as a pejorative at all. I would identify that way myself. But an anarchist or a voluntarist is someone who wants no rulers, someone who wants to govern themselves, who wants to be free from external restrictions and rules and things that are imposed on them in a non-voluntary way. And I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around the branding of BitNation. It uses sort of this language of the state: nation, citizen, ambassador, passport. And in fact, the logo is a chain. And I know that's a reference to the blockchain, but a chain, it chains you down. So how do you square this whole project and the idea of providing governance services when you also sort of have this identification that you don't want governance? You don't want to be subject to extra governance, and you'd rather govern yourself. Tell me more about that.
Well, so first of all, what we say, it's a collaborative platform for DIY governance, do-it-yourself governance. And when it comes to actual governance, I don't think some governance tools are hugely needed in the society, like, things I mentioned, like be able to secure your assets through marriage or land incorporation, etc. So I'm not against governance. I am against monopolies on violence, geographical monopolies on violence, right? And I think we have to make a big distinction between the two of them, because that's two entirely different things. When I call myself a voluntarist, what I mean by that is that I don't mind if people want to have like an entirely capitalist governance, economic model, or communist one, or if they want to have lots of governance or no governance at all. I think that's something that should be entirely up to the individual to decide. Essentially, I'm just providing the tool for people to be able to choose for themselves. In my ideal world, in the future, what I would like to see is that there are a million of competing governments, and if people are not happy with those governments, they can create their own, or they can choose to opt out altogether of all governance, or they can choose to take services from several different governments. All that should be completely modular and flexible. I want it to be as easy as for people to join, let's say, LinkedIn or Facebook or, a social media platform. It shouldn't be different than choosing your governance service providers.
So why would someone who is skeptical of government in general, like perhaps someone from an African country where they've grown up not being ever able to trust the government in their life and just knowing that they are rotten to the core and corrupt, or even someone from some place like the US who's really open to the ideas that there's government corruption here too, and in all systems of government governance, there are abuses of power. Anytime there's power, there are abuses of power and vulnerabilities and hacks and security problems. If you were going to sell BitNation to somebody who is very skeptical of government, what would you say? Why would they opt in if they're very skeptical of government?
Well, I think there are two questions baked into one there. First of all, in terms of like wanting governance or not wanting governance, I do think most people want governance services, although they're very skeptical of their current governance. I did polling about these issues and the perception of governance, various places from Afghanistan to Libya and Egypt, etc. And even though people wanted to overthrow the current government and they hated it with a passion, they were screaming for more governance, not less. So I think that's a misperception about how people feel in the developing world, because from most of the statistics I have seen, that's just not true, right? When it comes to people who don't want to be governed, to, fellow anarchists and libertarians, people say that they don't want to be governed. They still want to let's say, if you get married, you want a way to separate.
No, I don't want to get married. We talked about this on the last BitNation. Some people don't want any kind of state or overarching authority involved in their relationship. There are people out there who really genuinely don't want these services, or they're cherry picking them, the ones they do want, like maybe education through online courses or existing channels. So, again, why would a person like that opt in?
Well, they are not the target audience, obviously. I still think they should support the project for ideological reasons. What we are trying to show the world is that you don't need the government to do governance, that even people who strive for governance, and that should be okay. If people want governance, they should have governance, right? Then it can be done privately, and the blockchain, amongst other things, serve as a security in that regard, as a sort of final arbitrator, if you like. Yeah, it's just like Bitcoin in a way, right? You may not want a financial system, but replacing the financial system with a smarter and cheaper and more egalitarian system is better, because it shows to people around the world that there is an option to like federally manipulated money, right? It doesn't have to be like that. It can all be voluntary and without geographical monopolies on violence, the nation state. I think regardless if people want governance or don't want any governance, they should support everything that moves it towards a voluntary direction.
I think that there's an assumption that even though BitNation is something that is forkable, that your vision or the vision of the project is that there will be one main BitNation, and that if people don't like it, well, they can fork something and do something small. But I actually don't really think that's how the open source ecosystem is going to wind up working in this particular circumstance. And I have it in my head that there are going to be a whole like thousands or hundreds of thousands of BitNations out there that are all these kind of niche things, and there'll be lots of big ones. So I'm kind of curious what you think. Assume that all of this short-term stuff, we're past it, that you've successfully done all the stuff that you want to do. What does the world actually look like?
Well, that is my vision for the world. I mean, there are 7 billion people on Earth, and I think there should be, I don't know how many, as you say, hundreds of thousands of different governance alternatives. I see government providers the same way I see any other provider, whether it's restaurants or clothes or cars or whatever, it should be as much choice as people want it to be. And I think there is plenty of room for very many different types of governance and styles of governance. Someone maybe want to make BitNation fork that is for communism. Some may want someone that's specifically adapted to Sharia. And that should all be cool, as long as it's voluntary choice, right? If you watch my TED Talk, which I did 2 years ago, that's exactly what I talked about, that everybody should be able to create their own governments, and there should be hundreds of thousands of different governments competing in the world.
So really what it seems like then is that you are, with this project, attempting to break the monopoly of government. I heard you earlier describe the governments as having a monopoly of violence, essentially. And it seems to me that that's the one main thing, regardless if it's monopoly of violence or whatever, there is no monopoly in this particular circumstance. Could I be a member of 2 different BitNations? I mean, would that work simultaneously within such a system?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can be a member of 10, depending on their own rules, right? Or maybe some will require exclusivity. BitNations certainly don't. I mean, yeah, you can be a member of as many or as few as you want, or none at all. Of course, I mean, that's the point of the system, right? That it's entirely voluntary. I see it the same way as social networks. I'm currently on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, although not very actively so. So people in the same fashion should be able to be on as many social networks they want or as few as they want. If a BitNation comes out, a BitNation fork comes out that tries to enforce exclusivity of their platform, I don't think they will be very popular in the market for a long time.
Well, but potentially it might be, and if it was, people could just join that one, and one of the exclusions on it would be that you're only allowed to be a member of this BitNation if you're not a member of the other ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, people can set whatever rules they want.
So,
right?
I mean, the voluntary thing, I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to get back to here. I think that there's a difference between voluntarism and anarchism. I think anarchism speaks to whether or not we have rules that govern us, that govern our actions. And I think that voluntarism speaks to whether or not we get the choice of whether to do a given thing. So, if you don't like what you're particularly doing with this, Suzanne, already someone could fork it and try their own, take their own slight spin at it, although obviously it's much better if that waits until the project has a little bit more of a code base.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the purpose. This has been my vision for a decade. And it's something I've been talking and writing a lot about on several different media. So that's what I want to see. I want to see a world full of voluntary governments, hundreds of thousands of them.
Thanks for listening to episode 157 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's episode was provided by Suzanne Tempelhoff, Stephanie Murphy, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, and Adam B. Levine. Music for today's show was provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. This episode was edited by Denise Levine and Adam B. Levine. See you next time.